like, think of like a text message group. You couldn't do groups of text messages at the time. And you could do like broadcast updates. And so we were working on that as a side project. And when Audio had this problem, which is like we weren't going to beat Apple, we started doing these hackathons. And those hackathons were what made Twitter. So, the company originally was founded in 2004. By late 2005, we weren't going to be the number one. We were going to be the number two in podcasting. And we said, well, let's do something else. And we did these hackathon projects. And we're like, what if we combine blogging and this text message thing and some other stuff like that? And we made Twitter.
We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
Hi there, everybody. Welcome back to the Future Tech and Foresight podcast. I'm your host, as always, Mark Verbenkov, and this is going to be episode number 177. And we are once again talking about the future of social media platforms, which is, I think, ever more interesting and relevant, especially as we are getting quite a lot of information about what is happening down south with our neighbors down south, and kind of the information that's being spread across the world, but also, as always, more and more understanding of the challenges and the impacts that social media is bringing upon all of us as individuals, but as society as a whole. So that's actually one of the main points that is discussed in today's episode. I have a really great guest on today who brings not just, interesting insights as always on these podcast interviews, but also just a great wealth of knowledge about how social media was set up in the early phases. I'll read out his bio in a minute, but he was quite instrumental in, say, the early creation of Twitter. So it's really great to have him on the podcast today to talk about this. Obviously, as I mentioned, the societal impact of social media, we touch on that. We talk about Nostr, which is a decentralized alternative, which is obviously what he is working on. We talk a little bit about the role of community leaders, or I guess today they are influencers, and their role in shaping these online platforms. But really one of the main things that we talk about, or that Rabble specifically focuses on, is really the need for healthier digital interactions. And this goes to the cultural aspects, this goes to the individual psychological aspects, but also kind of the maybe the more black box aspects of social media platforms when it comes to the economics of how these platforms are actually making money and why they're doing the things that they're doing. So with that said, I definitely want to introduce my guest here today. His name is Evan Henshaw-Plath, also known as Rabble. He is a pioneering technologist and activist recognized for his work in social media and decentralized technologies. As a first employee and lead developer at Audio, he actually played a key role in creating Twitter, and his commitment to user-driven, community-focused platforms is reflected in his work with Nos.social. This is a decentralized social media app built on the Nostr protocol. He also co-founded the indiemedia.org tech team, advancing grassroots media. He is a former researcher at the MIT Media Lab's Center for Civic Media and an Edmund Hillary Fellow. Rabble combines technical expertise with a passion for political organizing, envisioning a future where digital communities operate independently of centralized control. Needless to say, it's quite an interesting discussion. I don't say very much because Rabble is such a wealth of information and knowledge. It's great to have him on the podcast. And if you're at all interested in social media platforms and kind of the ecosystem as a whole and the future of it, I think today's episode is a great one to listen to. Thank you, Rabble, for joining me on the podcast today to talk about something that I don't think I've brought up on the podcast enough, but it's always interesting to discuss, and that's social media, how it's good, how it's bad, and then some solutions that you are and your team are certainly working on. So thanks for coming on. Very much looking forward to your insights into this crazy industry.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on, and it's something I care a tremendous amount. So I'm glad to talk about it.
Yeah, yeah. Very much looking forward to getting into it. Before we start, though, how did you get into this wild world of social media and these kind of wacky platforms and everything that you're working on that we'll get to?
I got into the world of social media in many ways before social media became a thing. I was very involved with trying to figure out how to make the web and the internet more participatory. I was involved with the very early days of blogging 25 years ago and with the creation and invention of podcasting. And so I actually uh, helped start a company in 2004 called Odeo, and we were the first commercial podcasting company. And so I I've always believed that if we can democratize the media, we'll empower people so that everybody can participate in society. And so I've been working on projects like this for the last 25 years.
Hmm. Well, from what you're saying, it echoes a lot of the similar ideas that I've heard from other guests that have come on the podcast that were kind of there at the very beginning, during well, before a lot of the social media platforms were built, and there was this idea of openness, inclusivity between, anybody who wants to
Yep.
communicate ideas, and that doesn't really seem like where we are today. So I think you might have we can get into it, some insights as to like how things have changed. There's this 1.0 or social media 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0 that we're kind of moving into. Um, do you maybe want to start us off with a little bit more of the initial vision of what these platforms and tools were supposed to bring about?
Sure, absolutely. The initial idea was, how do we change the world so that people could have their own voice, so they could be their own media? And so that the ability to publish onto the internet, the ability to create a radio program didn't require a radio transmitter. The ability to publish a book didn't require a printer and a book publisher. The ability to write a newsletter didn't require these massive gatekeepers. And so what we're doing is saying, okay, let's just democratize this. Let's open it up. And there was a utopian feeling that if we just opened it up and had everyone participating in this, then it wouldn't be such like, you know, people would just come together and we would solve society's problems. And that was the hope. That was the idea. And um a lot of that positive aspect has happened.
Mm.
Like if you look at it and you think about it, it used to be to have a radio program or a television program, you had to go to New York or LA or a few other places and convince some producers and some gatekeepers to make that program. And they had to sign off on it. And if you said things they didn't like, they would kill your program. And if it wasn't, people liked it, but it didn't fit their channel, you had no other choice. And we've democratized that media. Now, the idea of a podcast or video, long form, short form, all this stuff seems inevitable. But 25 years ago, when we first proposed it, it was a radical concept.
It's such a short time frame when you really look back on it now. Like I'm old enough to remember a time where I didn't even know what an email was, right? I was a little bit younger. But you're saying 25 years ago, I talked to my grandparents recently who are in their 90s, and they were saying, when they were growing up, they had like one house in the whole neighborhood or in the whole village that had radio, and they would go there and get all the news. So the whole village had the same ideas, more or less, about what was going on. At that time it was World War II, but this idea of, yeah, you have to say things that the corporation or the powers that be, if you will, that give you the radio station or give you the opportunity to say what it is that you want, they control what you can say and what you can't say. Whereas now, the amount of podcasts, the amount of YouTube channels, the amount of just general people that are saying their mind, for better or for worse out there, I think it's kind of a given. And this, when you said 25 years, it's like that's such a short amount of time to
A
have.
very short period of time.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So in these early days, was there anybody thinking that, like, we're in these circles that you were working in? Was anybody thinking like, oh, I can create a monopoly and I can control, or I can create a new monopoly, if you will, or it was just everybody wanted to democratize? This was like the zeitgeist of the time.
No, the idea of building new sets of controls seemed very foreign. Like, podcasting was just your blog feed and you start linking to the MP3s. And the early era of Web 2.0, we just had open APIs. When we started off as this podcasting company, Audio, and it didn't work, Apple beat us to dominating the podcasting market. And we were like, oh shit, we need to do something else. And myself and one of the other engineers on the team had built this text message based status update thing. And it was called TextMob with some other folks. And what we did with TextMob is we used it for a protest. Like, think of like a text message group. You couldn't do groups of text messages then. And you could do like broadcast updates. And so we were working on that as a side project. And when Audio had this problem, which is like we weren't going to beat Apple, we started doing these hackathons. And those hackathons were what made Twitter. So, the company originally was founded in 2004. By late 2005, we weren't going to be the number one. We were going to be the number two in podcasting. And we said, well, let's do something else. And we did these hackathon projects. And we're like, what if we combine blogging and this text message thing and some other stuff like that? And we made Twitter, and it was a side project originally. It was not going to be the main thing. And the interesting part about it is that all of the innovation of it didn't happen from the company. It was by default an open API, and it was by default users creating it. And so at replies and hashtags and retweets and tweet streams and inline images and short links, everything we think of Twitter today, or Twitter as of, pre-Elon Musk, all of that was created by the users. And so it was this open space. You didn't have to ask permission to build stuff. Now, eventually what happened is there was no business model behind it. And the Twitter company, after all of the founders had left, sort of shut down that open ecosystem. And they said, we're going to control it and we're going to make it all advertising, and that's going to be it. And the only way to access Twitter is Twitter apps. That's it. That's the moment at which I, who had long since left by then, said, oh no, this is not okay. We need an open protocol. We need a permissionless protocol that lets us have that innovation, that space where I don't have to ask permission to build a new app. I don't have to ask permission for what I got to say. I don't have to expect some other third party to set a set of rules that I don't even know exist and will define whether or not my account is exists. So what and eventually I talked Jack Dorsey into backing the same project, is we were part of a community saying, this is starting in 2012. Twitter has gone wrong. We've lost the openness. Now, it took us a long time to figure out how to build new technology that would open and expand and share in that way. And so that's where we get today. I'm working on Nostr, but we're also part of this larger community which says social media shouldn't be owned and controlled by a few large companies. And instead, it should work like email, it should work like the web, where users control their data. It should work like podcasting, because podcasting is open. Like, podcasting is the great example of Web 2.0 that stayed open and stayed innovative and wasn't controlled by a single company. You know, Apple tried a little bit to control it. Spotify tried a little bit to control it. But truth of the matter is that, like, there's no one podcasting client that more than 25% of people use.
Mm.
And
Now-
that's amazing.
Yeah, I don't want to cut you off here, but why is that, right? So if I'm hearing social media in its early day had this beautiful vision, podcasting the same, why did social media go one way and podcasting go the other way? Like, is there some lesson there that we can learn for this new Web 3.0 phase?
So I think it's because Apple came in and integrated podcasting into iTunes and then ignored it.
That simple?
Yeah, because
Crazy.
Apple came in and they provided a good enough solution, and it kind of cleared the field of anyone who's going to invest in podcasting platforms. And so after Apple launches their tools, it's good enough, but not great. And it was good enough to scare away big investors, but bad enough that individual hackers and developers and startup people would go build their own things. And it was based on a few pieces of simple standards and tools. And so if you are a developer wanting to build something, you build podcast hosting tools, or you build the ad platform, or you build your new podcasting client, or you build tools for scheduling podcast interviews, you build tools for building out the video clips and posting it in short form. And you don't build it all on top of it. You don't build everybody together.
Please.
So Apple went in and Apple cleared the playing field, and they scared us out of podcasting. Odeo pivoted to build Twitter because we didn't think we can compete with Apple, and it scared everybody else out of the space. And that let podcasting develop as this diverse ecosystem, whereas Twitter itself, and then Instagram and video startups like YouTube, all of these other forms of social media, basically we didn't have someone go in and clear the field.
Mm.
And then keep everybody else out and let the innovation happen. You know, up until from when Twitter was founded in 2006 until 2012, Twitter was a good steward of the open ecosystem. You wouldn't use an app from Twitter, the company. You'd use TweetDeck or Twitterific or TweetDroid or any of these other apps. And then Twitter decided that they didn't have a business model, and they didn't come up with a business model that supported the open ecosystem. And podcasting got advertising and paid podcasting, subscription content,
Right.
as the business model, but microblogging didn't have that. And so Twitter shut it all down and said, well, we need to control it. We need this to be our advertising world. And then we lost that open innovation. Facebook, about the same time, shut down their F8 platform. Like, their really powerful Facebook app platform got shut down. And they're like, yeah, you can't play Farmville anymore. You can't use causes to collect millions of dollars of donations for your nonprofit. You can only do the things that Meta wants you to do on Facebook. And when that happened, all of a sudden, companies like Zynga lost their way and no one would invest in new ones. And so we had this massive innovation from about 2004 to 2012, where anybody could build any social apps they wanted to. And then we went through this consolidation period from 2012 to 2022, where the few big players just got bigger and bigger and bigger and had huge power over the world, but didn't like, and people could say whatever they want, but then it became important of like, well, what's the algorithm? It went from chronological to algorithm. What is it optimizing for? What are they doing with the ads? Are they, what happens to political content? Where does it go? Is it highlighted? Is it dehighlighted? How does it shift? And all of a sudden you can control culture and politics by controlling the algorithm.
Which
And
took a couple of years for people to understand.
yeah,
Right. Yeah.
no, it was hugely problematic. So a small crew of us starting in 2012 said, we need an open alternative. And it took a long time to figure out how to build that.
Hmm.
The first one was the Activity Pub, which comes a Fediverse and Mastodon, which basically says, let's just have a network of servers that are like really small Twitters or really small Instagrams. And then people started looking at the Web3 tech stuff. And a bunch of people tried to build it with blockchain projects. But that didn't work either, because the blockchain projects were just like, what if everything was paid and everything you do in this social platform costs money?
Which is not going to work. Yeah.
Which is not going to work. And then eventually we end up in the technology that does work. And this, little teeny sets of people, which is, well, what if we use a bunch of the cryptocurrency stuff, but not the blockchain? What if we use a bunch of the cryptography and the math and the distributed programming technology that comes out of the cryptocurrency world, but not the payments?
Mm.
And that is what leads to Blue Sky, Farcaster, Lens, Secure Scuttlebutt, Nostr. All of these protocols sort of are this new generation of social protocols that have emerged that really let us revive the dream of Web 2.0.
Very exciting. So it's only been really a couple of years then that this revived dream was even possible. There needed to be a new wave of technologies, if you will, that enabled such a thing. Now, how do you keep it open? I'm assuming it's because of the technologies enable it, but how do you keep this open and not have the same thing that happened with Web 1 moving into Web 2 happen with this new phase, right? Is it not going to be possible? A new Facebook or a new Twitter comes around and gobbles everything up, and then you're just right back to square one?
That's the great giant question. Like, how do we lock open the
Yes.
systems?
Yes.
And the way we do it is two things. One, you need several things. You need the credible ability to exit, which means if I don't like the way Blue Sky or Threads or Mastodon is doing, I need to be able to leave, not just with my data, but with my followers, with my identity, with my connections, and I need to be able to use all of that data, continuing to connect to everyone in a new system. So if I don't like your software, I can leave to other software, but keep all of the connections. Now, in the Mastodon world, you just basically add like a forwarding address. You can't really move all your data and everything else. It works as long as the people you're leaving have faith in you. Like if they're happy to let you go, you can leave, which is better than nothing. Like you can't leave Twitter and take everything with you. And Threads, which is, Meta's thing, that is basically what they promise. They like, trust us, we'll let you leave and we'll interact with other people. But if there's a single company in the world of social media that does not deserve to be trusted, it's Meta.
Yeah.
Like, they have a giant history of lying to people about stuff.
And it wasn't like Threads one, like I don't even think I started up an account there because I'd heard, could have been rumors, but if you start up with Threads, account, you try to leave it, they either don't let you leave, or your Facebook and your Threads account might have been shut down. This is like a year ago or something like that when it was started up.
So the Threads account is the same account as your Instagram account. So now you can have a situation where you would lose your Instagram account because of some Threads policy thing that you didn't know existed, and you broke some rule that you didn't know existed, and all of a sudden you've lost all of your photos for a decade.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's nuts. Yeah.
So the first thing we tried was, we're like, Twitter used to be this open thing. This was back when Jack Dorsey was still CEO of Twitter. And I'm like, decentralization, let's do this. And this guy, Mike Mastick, wrote this article called Protocols Not Platforms, which is like, I know the problem with free speech is that we're giving all the power to these platforms. We should replace them with protocols. We should make social media work more like the web, more like email. And we were able to get Twitter to invest $13 million in building the Blue Sky project as an independent project to build new technology. And that was going along for a while as a project that was very much a research project. Once Elon Musk took over Twitter, then there became a more real need. And a bunch of people did startups. They're like, I'm going to replace Twitter. I'm going to replace Twitter. I'm going to replace Twitter. And some people, like most of the people doing that, they don't know why Twitter succeeded. And they're like, just trust me more than Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg. The Blue Sky team was like, I know, there was much more momentum and energy and people joined and everything else. And they went out and they built something. But they ended up with a fundamental problem, which is their initial user base wanted a more strongly moderated and controlled version of Twitter. And they're doing the right thing. They're giving the users what they want.
Sure.
But the users don't want credible exit. The users don't want an open network. So you have Blue Sky, the company, which is trying to build an open network, and Blue Sky, the users, which say, why are you doing this open stuff? We trust you guys. You guys just make better decisions.
Right.
Or just getting pissed at them. So as that's going on, and a bunch of us are involved in sort of the larger Blue Sky ecosystem and projects, some of us are like, there's a problem, which it's not designed as a permissionless network. It's not designed as this open network. It's not designed as a system that will let us build, end-to-end encryption. It's like 90% there, but it's designed in such a way that the company can take that control again. And so that's why we switched and we worked on this thing called Nostr, which is a decentralized social protocol for building social applications. You can build any kind of application that Facebook or anyone else did, but because it doesn't have a company at the center of it, that you can build any kind of application and you don't have to ask for permission. And so it is a much more flexible, open protocol. And so what we've been able to do is we've been able to say, okay, let's reinvent how social applications work. Let's reinvent what they do, and let's build it on this decentralized database technology called Nostr. And what it's going to do is it's going to let us revive the dream of Web 2.0, where Satlantis can build its, social directory app, and, Zapstreams can build a social streaming app, and, Obla News can build a blogging app. But you don't have to use the Obla News app. You can use Yakahone, or you can use Blogstack, or you can use highlighter.com. All of these apps that different people use and develop get to exist in the same ecosystem. And so users are really empowered to take control of their world, and you can use your same identity, your same account in all of these applications, and the user decides what applications they're using. And so that was like what we were building in Web 2.0 20 years ago, before it all got shut down so that people could make a lot of money on advertising. And now I don't need to ask people's permission to build a new kind of app on these protocols. And you as a user don't need to ask for permission in order to use it in a different way. A great example of this is we're working with some Maori indigenous folks here in New Zealand, and they want a social platform, but they care a lot about sovereignty because they were victims of colonialism. They're like, we don't trust the New Zealand government. We don't trust these corporations. We want to run our own servers. We want to run our own tech. And we don't want it to be all in the hands of one Maori person or organization, because they could go bad as well.
Sure.
Like, you get mutual trust by having a more decentralized network. And so what they're looking at is saying, okay, well, how do we adapt it so that we can run our own relay servers, so we can have our own software, we have our own things, and it'll all use the common protocol, but they can maintain community sovereignty. And then they can use the cross verification of identities of who you're connected to as their social KYC for their own community run banks. And that lets them have control, which there's, instead of the New Zealand government's way of identifying what's your birth certificate, what's your ID, how do you verify, what they're going to do is they're going to go around the other way and say, what's your tribe, what's your community, what's your ancestry, who are you connected to? We're going to cross verify all these things, and that is your identity that's powerful. And so they can't do that on Facebook. They can't do that on Twitter. They can't do it on even Mastodon. What they need is a system where they can use the common technology and redefine how it's all going to work. And so the things we're building with Nostr is like saying, what if we didn't have to let somebody else make these decisions for us? What if we could make these decisions for ourselves? What if we could make easy to use software that did everything you want to do, but kept you in control?
Fascinating. There's always a question in here that is connected to the scale and the user base, right? So, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, etc. They have just a tremendous user base, and my sense is most people just want to use these apps for, whether it's watching shorts or just quickly sending a tweet, and they're not fully concerned with all these ideas, right? And I think that
most people don't care.
Most people don't care, precisely. So what is, and I'm sure you guys have thought about this, but what is the kind of formula for this transition? Is it people just get so fed up with their private data being used against them? There's just greater awareness. There's, you were talking about the Maori in New Zealand. Are there just like different pockets of users, different types of communities that start coming onto the Nostr platform and these other platforms? And then there's a kind of a tipping point where there's enough on these platforms that other people start to join your platforms because of the network effect. Like what's the process, if you will, to get more people on?
When when I joined Twitter, there were 5 other people on Twitter. And everybody had done one tweet. And so Twitter now is hundreds of millions of people. It wasn't an immediate thing that caused that growth. What happened was we went to our friends and we said, hey, we've got this new thing. It's really cool. You can do these status updates. And you know what our friend said is, this is really stupid. Why do I want my phone vibrating all the time? Why do I want these messages? Why can't I send more than 140 characters? But small pockets of people joined and were successful at engaging in it. And those folks pulled in new people. They engaged with other folks and they brought them in. And so people didn't join randomly. People joined because there were other people they wanted to be with and they wanted to connect. Now, with Blue Sky, for a long time, the tech has been there and it's worked. But people didn't join. Didn't matter what goes on. Turns out that it took Trump winning the election a second time with strong support from Elon Musk for a bunch of people to be like, okay, I'm finally ready to leave Twitter. And then Blue Sky was there. And Blue Sky did a good job of finding people, those connections, and finding new communities and building it out. With Nostr, the way we're growing is by building these apps for different kinds of communities.
Got it.
And so you're looking for a live streaming platform, or you're looking for a microblogging platform where you can do micropayments, or you're looking for a newsletter platform or a video sharing platform or a podcasting thing. You're looking for all these different tools and you're looking for the content and connecting to people. And so a few people are the early adopters. They're like, I want to try everything. And a few people are like, okay, this works. Come on, folks. And most people are following their friends, following the content they do. So we grow these platforms by coming together and saying, okay, who are the experimenters? Who are the early adopters? And then once the experiments work, who are the stewards? Who are the community organizers? Who is that person who is the community leader? When Twitter was started, we didn't talk about influencers.
Right.
We talked about people who convened a community. And then, you brought people together and you talked about it, whether, depending on what it is, Gary Vaynerchuk was talking about wine and he brought together a world of people who care about wine. He didn't manipulate the algorithm so that he could be in front of everybody who cares about wine. He paid attention to people who cares about wine. He talked about it. He put together a community. And so I think we need to look at the world and say, that was healthier. Learning how to manipulate the algorithm so that you can get in front of a bunch of people, you end up with a community, but you don't have accountability. We end up with people canceling each other and all sorts of nasty behavior because we don't have any way of saying you're in my community and you're not in my community. We're just stuck with the algorithm deciding who's in what community.
Yeah. And with the, we've talked obviously about artificial intelligence and these algorithms a lot on this podcast. And if there's any truth to what the, couple dozen guests that have come on to warn about what's coming out with these algorithms, you definitely don't want AI to be choosing how these communities are created. It's going to lead to madness, as if we're not already there with, I'm in Canada, but we've been following the election and all the fallout relatively closely. So we don't need to go down that path. But
the reality is that the American elections affect everyone.
Yes, for sure. So with the time left allotted to us, should we focus a little bit more on kind of the future of Nostr and Web3 and how this is going to play out? Because to me, it still seems like I'm as connected to as many emerging technology industries and spheres, if you want, as possible. But I know that the vast majority of people out there aren't, right? They hear about what would it be like the Optimus Tesla bot, right? And it's like, ooh, this is crazy, right? But they're not aware of Boston Dynamics Atlas that has been improving over the last decade or something like that. So if we're looking kind of in the future, I'm aware of this. You're obviously, in the middle of it. How long is it going to take for
people to become aware of Web3, aware of these alternatives? Is it just going to be a slow grind? Do you think that there's going to be like another event, like a Trump election that moves people over? What are your thoughts on this?
I think people will never be aware of it.
Hmm.
I think we are going very slowly, building the blocks that we can build alternative structures on how to do this, but they aren't aware of it. I don't think people who joined Twitter were aware of the building blocks. Were they aware of all the work that we had done with this asterisk telephony platform that made sending and receiving SMSs easy? No. Were they aware of the years of work that went into creating Ruby on Rails? No. Like, Twitter couldn't have existed without Asterisk and Ruby on Rails. Two technology platforms that had been years in the working that came together and took a long time to get good enough. And then we built Twitter in a day. Like, we spent years building the underlying blocks and technologies and tools and everything else, but the actual prototype of Twitter was built from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And at 6 p.m. we demoed it. Because we had years of work that we could build off of, we could be like, oh, I could just hack this way of sending SMSs because we figured that out. And I could build this RESTful web app and I can get this API and I can get this stuff. And so what we're seeing with Nostr is still that building block phase. We are still building it. Now, if you're interested in this stuff, you can go in and you can join, you can play stuff and you can use all these apps and whatnot. And it's super exciting because you can do amazing things and but once people use it and it starts taking off, it'll take off faster than you ever thought because that's what happens. And most people have no idea the components. To give you an example, we have in Nostr this technology called MLS, Message Layer Security. It basically lets us do signal kinds of encryption, but scalable to hundreds of thousands of users, not the 256 that's limited to Signal. And every kind of social media message type, events and streaming and content and long form and short form and collaborative stuff and bookmarking, all of that stuff now can go inside the MLS encrypted buckets, and then we can have private groups and stuff. That technology took a long time to develop. And at some point, it's going to be like that. And then people will use it. And then we won't worry about the details of how it worked. The overnight success, if we get it right, will happen after the decade of work.
Yeah. And as you said very correctly, people won't care, right? They'll want a functioning product and just a simple understanding, oh, this is different from Facebook and Twitter in this way. Well, I want to use it that way, so therefore I'm going to use that.
Exactly. So in Nostr and in Blue Sky and these other ones, you can go and you can choose your own algorithms. You can go in and say, I want this algorithm, I want that algorithm, I want to optimize for this stuff. You can choose what servers you do. And if you're a developer, you can build new algorithms. That is conceptually so simple and was so much work to make happen. And once there are a million algorithms to choose from, then the power of the one algorithm diminishes because we're not dependent on everybody being optimized for the same direction. And that, that's a powerful thing. So for example, on Blue Sky, I can choose a feed and it only shows me moss. Pictures of moss. On Nostr, I can choose a different one that only shows me funny cat videos.
Well, now we're talking.
And if I am stressed out, I can just go into the Nostr apps and I can go and I say, I just want to see the funny cat videos. Now, I don't know who's uploading these funny cat videos. I don't know who wrote the algorithm for find the funny cat videos. I don't know any of that stuff, but I don't need to. All I need to know is I can go into my app, Not Social or primal.net, and I could say, I want the funny cat videos. And then you see them. And then that makes you want to share and invite other people in because you're like, it's not this hellhole where everybody's just yelling at each other. It's like, look, these are fun. People want fun. People want connection. People want meaning. People want to feel safe. Somehow we ended up in this, giant argument dive bar where we just yell at each other all the time. And that's because of collapsing context. That's because it's too easy for me to drop into your replies. That's because if we were in an actual bar and you and your friends are getting in a heated argument, I'd have to leave my table and walk over and join that conversation. And I have to pull myself up and be participant and go and do that. And then people would see me, they would make various different judgments, they would include, and then they could decide what happens. With big social media, with these giant public spaces, it's too easy to drop in and be out of context. And having this single flat space, the single system, single sets of algorithms, single set of flat space where you don't have a sense of where you are, that's what caused a lot of the unhealthy behavior.
Hmm. And I would also add that there's, with the anonymity that comes along with dropping into that space, there's lack of repercussions, right?
Exactly.
You have some random account that's not your name, that's not connected to you really in any way. You can say whatever you want, and there's no reprisal. There's no, you're talking about going over to a bar. If you do that in real life and you say something, mean or nasty to another group, there's actually a potential threat of physical violence. You can't. There's
If you
no
go into a bar and you're like, I don't hate, I hate that you've got the MAGA hat on there and you throw beer in someone's face, which is the digital equivalent of what people do all the time when these comment threads are like piling on and everything else. There are repercussions. We know there are repercussions.
Yeah.
And violence is not okay, but like, even if someone's not getting violent and they're just yelling at you, or the bouncer shows up and says, you're out of here. Like, that's healthier. Like, it's healthier to have a bouncer that said you have to go out of this bar. And the digital equivalent of that is you go report each other to the trust and safety teams, and then all of a sudden, your name disappears, your followers disappear, your content disappears. And you're like, what happened? Like, was this a violation of the rule or not? Like, you don't know. And so we don't have good tools for that, but we can build good tools. And I think with Nostr and all of these other emerging social protocols, we are building better tools to help us answer these questions.
Hmm. Well, Rebel, I think that you guys need to focus on the funny cat videos. I think that's the secret to the tipping point. Yeah, because I mean, I'm partly joking, but partly, in truth here, because I think as you correctly identified, and I've heard this from many other people, and I think it myself, people don't care, right? Like I'm not an engineer, I'm not a programmer. I don't really understand how the internet works, but I use it every single day. I don't really understand. I mean, I kind of do, but I don't really understand how ChatGPT works. I use it every single day. As long as it's useful, as long as it provides me value, and I know that this is how most other people think as well, they're going to use it.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah. I want to ask, I mean, there's many other questions I want to ask, but I know our time is winding down. Do you think that as Nostr and these other platforms start to gain a bit more of a foothold, do you think that like the Metas and the Twitters, et cetera, are gonna, push their weight around a little bit to slow you guys, stop you guys? I don't know, make it a little bit more difficult. Have you already experienced something like that? Um, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. There's direct hostility, like, Twitter is preventing you from saying the word Nostr or Blue Sky or Mastodon.
Ah,
That didn't last very long, but there were moments when that was going on. There's adjustments on the large platforms. You look at Threads. Threads is a classic embrace and extend play, where if Meta had gone in and built a Twitter clone that didn't call itself open, regulators would have smacked down on them. But by saying we're going to interoperate with the Fediverse and we're going to have this open thing that supports ActivityPub, they're open a little bit more. And if Blue Sky hadn't got some traction, then Threads would have just slow walked their opening up and not really opened up. Meta at one point had very open APIs. At one point, Meta fully supported activity streams, which was the precursor protocol to ActivityPub that Mastodon runs. Twitter at one point was open and federated using XMPP as the protocol, just like Mastodon is, just like these other protocols. So these big companies and these big platforms, they won't stay open unless there's a credible threat and a power balance behind it.
Right.
It doesn't matter how much you like, hey, you should be nice and you should do this good thing. So we need to build the credible threat, the ability to leave, the ability to control stuff. And then those big companies and those big platforms will be forced to play nice and participate. And some of it is due to market dynamics. Some of it is due to government regulation. Some of it is due to controlling the user experience. And some of it is due to technology. If they can, they will destroy and undermine it. We have the job of building something that they can't do that to.
Well, I guess like anything, it's a battle. It's survival of the fittest, and I wish you all the best of luck with this rabble. If there is a big fight, please come back onto the podcast and lend your voice, and the followers that listen, maybe there's somebody in there that can help sway things in your way. I think it's I try to keep my ideas as objective as possible. I try not to infuse my ideas too much in the podcast, but yeah, this is definitely something that's absolutely essential. We touched on it very, very briefly about all the lack of trust that we have and that most people have for Meta and these other platforms, and there's a real reason for it. So I really wish that you and Nostr are able to continue and bring about this very, very potentially interesting future that I think we all need. I want to say thank you absolutely for coming onto the podcast. You're a wealth of information. I really feel that I could just let you talk for another hour or two. Maybe I'll have to do that at some future point. But
I'm happy to come back on. When we think about the future of tech, like to get very specific about this podcast, we need a future where you can innovate. We need a future where you can build something where you don't need to ask permission to build something. Like mobile apps before Apple came along, you had to get Samsung and T-Mobile and everyone else to say, yes, you can build a mobile app. We need a world where you can just try something. You can just build on it. And these open social protocols let people build new applications without asking for permission, without gatekeepers. We still have to do it. We have to make it work. But it opens the door to future innovation.
Perfect place to end the pod. Thanks again, Ravel. Really appreciate it, and couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Awesome.
lot of future shock people and future shock institutions in our society. They're simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where progress is so fast it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.